Tragic backstories, flaws, make them relatable is only part of the truth. Whenever I write a compelling character, these three questions sits at the core before I invent any backstory. What do they want? What stands in their way? And why are they who they are? Hey everyone, I'm Crimson Blitz, a narrative designer. I'm currently developing an indie JRPG using RPG Maker. So I say that so I don't have people hopping in and getting Pikachu faced when all they find is game dev content. Anyway, let's get started. When you sit down to write a character, what do you start with? Their backstory? Maybe take inspiration from a character you like? When I write a character, I first take the premise. You can use your inspirations for this. A truth seeker in a city of lies. A bright-eyed heroine who stumbles upon a legendary spear. You take that premise, and then you ask, what does this character want the most at the moment? This might be the biggest hurdle yet because it's tapping into your empathy. I struggled on it a little too while trying to think of ways to improve the narrative for Heartbound. In that video, the way I came up with it is through context, since I was already working with a setting. Lore had an abusive alcoholic father, and Baron is his only friend. What kind of person comes out of that? Someone lacking familial love. So what Lore would want is the feeling of belonging and love. But don't fret, you can usually find inspiration pretty easily. Read books, watch movies, listen to music, play video games, grab whatever piques your interest, whatever goes, I like a character like this in my story, and put them in there. Not their character arc, just the rough idea of the character. For example, I made Celia Redmoon, the protagonist of my JRPG game, after listening to Ace of Japan. Then Celia became a character who wanted to inspire people. Now we know what our character wants. We ask, what stands in their way? Internal, external, environmental conflict. Pick what stands out the most to you. You might need some initial inspiration like before, so take your time. A lot of advice says what the character wants versus what they need. I usually go, what are the two opposites that the character wants? Sounds contradictory, doesn't it? This is the writing of the human heart in conflict with itself. Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Jon Snow torn between his own desires and what he had raised himself up to believe. It is through the character wanting two mutually exclusive things that great internal conflict is born. On that note, external conflict is rarely throw the biggest baddest at your character and have an epic fight scene. Or it usually is, but I believe the best external conflict is one that forces a character to confront their internal ones. The most compelling point of a story is when your character questions their own identity, because that's the point of change. So let's go back to Heartbound. The story's narrative is a little something like this. Lore lives a fairly miserable life. He only has his best friend Baron. One day, Baron goes missing. Lore goes to save him. Now let's add my two principles for writing a compelling character. Lore was neglected by his alcoholic father for most of his childhood. Cynical, bitter, and pessimistic. He did not attempt to connect with anyone. Baron was all that he needed, but one day, as Baron suddenly goes missing, he finds himself torn between the desire to save his only semblance of a friendship or remain as is in the comfort of his own misery. That's quite compelling. There's one more loose end to tie. Relatability. Being relatable isn't Lore being depressed or having an alcoholic father. Being relatable is in how the player connects with the decision that Lore makes. It's once again empathy. It's why Lore does things that the player can understand. The eventual concept behind my rendition of Lore is that he is someone who is buried so deep in self-misery and self-pity that he cannot imagine a future where he is happy. Taking inspiration from characters like Shigaraki from My Hero, let me ask you this to test your empathy. You're born into a crappy household, your parents neglect you, you have no freedom growing up, no chance for hobbies, never ate good food, every bad card you could have gotten dealt in life has been dealt. You grow up into your adult years anyway. Things have moved on. You are independent now. But do you really feel like you belong where everyone else is? Or does it not feel real? Does it feel like you come from a world so far from them that you feel like you don't even belong there at all? You feel broken, like a patched up thing. You were never normal and you never will be. No matter how hard you try, no matter how successful you get, it feels like you can't outrun that broken childhood. You want to start over. You want a new hand from the very beginning. Something fair. You don't want help. You don't want to move on. You want to tear the world apart. Because not doing so means forgiving everything bad that has ever happened to you. This why creates relatability. Not I listen to the same mixtape or I also play basketball, But when the reader can genuinely understand why you became who you are, they relate to your feelings, your anguish, your pain. And that's the three pillars of writing a compelling character, to me at least. The want, the opposition, and the why. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more.